I'd been coming to this corner cafe for months, always the same stool by the window, my laptop balanced on the edge, a half-drained black coffee sweating condensation onto the table. The barista knew my order: large drip, no sugar, extra napkins tucked under the cup. Routine was comfort. Quiet. Predictable. She was there before me, though I hadn't noticed at first. Mid-40s, maybe, with hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck and a cardigan that hung just right. She had that look you can't explain, a kind of ease in small, ordinary movements. Her eyes flicked up from a notebook as I set my laptop down. For a moment I caught her glance. It wasn't exactly recognition, more like a pause, like she noticed me noticing her. I fumbled with my coffee lid, smudging the rim with my thumb, and she gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Not the kind people flash at strangers. The kind that lingers like a soft echo. "Hey," she said. Quiet, unassuming. Like she'd forgotten she'd said it by the time the word left her mouth. Hi," I muttered, and I could feel my hands pressing against the laptop as if it could somehow stop me from trembling. I watched her stir her tea slowly, one finger tracing the rim of the cup, and for some reason, my chest tightened. There was a rhythm to her motion, the way she tilted her head just so, that made the air around her feel denser. I realized I'd been holding my breath. "You come here often?" she asked. Not to be clever, just a question tossed gently into the quiet. "Yeah, usually mornings." "It's calm," I said. My voice sounded wrong, too high. I cleared my throat. "You?" "Afternoons mostly. But I like the mornings sometimes. Fewer people." She smiled again, but this time it lingered in the corners of her eyes. There was something almost unbearable in the small space between us, the unspoken, the micro-habits, like the way she folded her napkin with careful precision, or how I kept flicking my eyes toward her hands, like I might miss a movement if I looked away. I realized I'd taken a sip of coffee and not swallowed, just letting it sit, tasting the heat, counting her pauses, her gestures. I hadn't felt seen like this in a long time. Not that I noticed until now. My phone vibrated, unsent messages waiting to be deleted, conversations I didn't have courage for, and I felt the quiet weight of it, the stillness in a life mostly lived in small, paused thoughts. She stood, sliding her notebook into a bag that smelled faintly of leather and lavender. "I should get going," she said, and my stomach tightened again at the thought of her leaving, like I'd been holding a fragile part of her in my hands without knowing it. Then, just as she passed by, her hand brushed mine, not enough to be contact, just a whisper, and I forgot how to breathe, how to think, how to remember that the world went on. I watched her leave. My phone buzzed again. A message I didn't recognize. No name. Just 3 words. "See you tomorrow?" And suddenly, I wasn't so sure I'd ever breathe normally again. The next morning, I found myself walking past the cafe again, even though I didn't have a class until noon. I told myself it was habit, routine, caffeine, but really I was looking for her. She was already at her usual table, notebook open, pen hovering over the page like she was waiting for a thought to land. "Morning," I said, sliding into the seat across from her before she could speak. "Morning," she replied, eyes soft. Not a smile, not yet, just the quiet acknowledgement that I existed in her space. We ordered tea this time, her favorite, she said, chamomile with a touch of honey. I watched her pour slowly, listening to the faint clink of the spoon against porcelain. I almost wanted to say something, about the ritual, about how oddly soothing it was, but instead I just stirred my own cup, pretending it mattered. "Do you write often?" I asked, nodding toward her notebook. She glanced down, a slight crease forming between her brows. "Not really. Just thoughts, little things I don't want to forget." She tapped the pen against her lip. "Yesterday, I found an old postcard from my brother. He's far away. I realized I hadn't missed him until I saw the card. It was the first personal thing she'd shared. My stomach twisted, not in lust exactly, but in the way you feel when someone lowers the barrier and lets you peek at their edges. I wanted to say something clever, comforting, but all I managed was a nod. My fingers drummed lightly on the table. There was a pause. We sipped in silence, the steam curling between us. I imagined a life where this table wasn't just a cafe prop, where I could reach across and brush her hand without feeling the weight of the world. My mind raced. What if she thought this was improper? Too close? I was 24, fumbling through life, and she had years behind her, stories I didn't know how to respect. "I've never met anyone who notices details the way you do," she said suddenly, voice soft, almost shy. She gestured to my coffee, the way I'd accidentally balanced it too close to the edge, the way I'd frowned at my phone as if it held my answers. "It's rare. Kind of nice." I swallowed hard. The room felt smaller, heavier, as if the distance between us could collapse with the slightest shift. I wanted to reach for her hand, but instead I just flipped my gaze toward hers, caught the brief shimmer of something unspoken. A laugh escaped her, small, airy, like a window cracking open in a stuffy room. "Careful, you'll spill it all," she said, teasing lightly as she nudged my cup with her finger. It was simple, almost nothing, but my chest stuttered at the touch of her hand so close to mine. I noticed how her hair caught the sunlight, the way her eyes softened when she looked down, the faint scent of tea and lavender. And in that quiet, I realized that the tension wasn't about the age gap, or propriety, or the life I thought I should be living. It was about being seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't have to notice me at all. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It was Thursday. I'd taken a longer route to the cafe, telling myself it was habit, but really it was anticipation. She was already there, notebook open, but her gaze flicked away when I slid into the seat opposite her. The soft curl of her hair caught the light differently today, and I almost reached out, but stopped. "I didn't see you yesterday," she said, voice careful. Almost like she was testing the air between us. "I came by," I said, my words uneven. "Morning, I mean." I cleared my throat. She shook her head, lightly, a soft, imperceptible gesture. Don't explain." We sat. Tea steamed. The chair creaked beneath her weight. Silence filled the space in fragments, like breaths I didn't know how to take. I kept glancing at her hands, how they curled around the cup, the faint tremor when she lifted it. Small. Nothing. Everything. I wanted to reach for her, and maybe she wanted the same, but something lingered, restraint, the weight of years, or the question of what this could mean. My stomach twisted. I imagined her leaving, and it wasn't just the loss of company. It was the faint ache of missing someone before they were really yours. The cafe door opened. A classmate of mine, someone I'd barely spoken to, waved and came over. My pulse stuttered. She glanced up, polite, careful, and I felt the pull of normality tug at her sleeve, and maybe at mine too. I tried to smile. The classmate chatted. I nodded. Her eyes flicked to mine, a soft, almost imperceptible warning, or plea. I didn't know which. She returned to her notebook, but the words were slower, deliberate, cautious. I traced the rim of my cup with my thumb, pretending to read emails I'd never sent. My phone vibrated with messages I ignored. My eyes kept drifting toward her, lingering on her lips for a fraction too long, on the way her hands moved, the curve of her neck when she bent over her page. I think I left something at the library yesterday," she said suddenly, a trace of hesitation in her voice. "Do you mind?" "Not at all," I said, standing quickly, knocking my chair slightly against hers. The accidental closeness made my pulse spike. She handed me the notebook. Fingers brushed. Not much. Not enough. And yet, for a heartbeat, I thought about leaning in. Just enough. Maybe to touch lips. Maybe to speak the words that hovered on the edge of all the silences we'd shared. But she pulled back, softly, almost like a sigh escaping through her teeth. I stepped back too, hands awkwardly in my pockets, pretending it hadn't mattered. The air between us was heavier now, quiet but charged. She opened the notebook, scribbled something I couldn't read, and I sat, trying not to imagine the trace of her fingers on mine, the almost thought of what might have been. I wanted to say something. Anything. But instead, I watched her hair shift as she looked down, and I realized, maybe some things are closer than you think, but still untouchable. It was late afternoon when I saw her leaving the library, a stack of books clutched to her chest, the sun catching the silver in her hair. I jogged to catch up, my backpack bouncing awkwardly on my shoulder. She didn't turn immediately, and I felt a pang, a quiet panic, the kind that comes from realizing you might let someone slip past without ever saying what's on your mind. "Hey," I said finally, voice rough from running. She paused, small smile, but not quite there. "Hey." We walked. Sidewalk cracked underfoot, pigeons scattered ahead. She kept her eyes on the ground, adjusting the strap of her bag. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat. You were with someone yesterday?" I blurted, and immediately regretted it. My chest ached the instant it came out. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and careful. "Why?" she asked. Not accusatory. Just wary. "I don't know," I said, hands shoved deep in pockets. "I thought I saw you." My voice faltered. I realized I was jealous. Ridiculous. 24. And yet, it twisted my stomach. She sighed, light, almost imperceptible. "You don't have to, no, I stopped. Tried again. I hate the thought of you with anyone else. Even if it's nothing. Even if it doesn't mean anything. It just..." My words trailed, drowned in the hum of distant traffic. Her hand brushed against mine accidentally as she adjusted the bag. Just a touch. My chest seized. I wanted to take it, to hold it, to anchor myself to her presence. But I didn't. Instead, I walked closer, careful, too careful. "You're different," I said quietly. I don't know why, but..." My voice hitched. I swallowed. "I feel like I'm never invisible when I'm with you. And I don't know if I should want that, but I do." Her eyes softened. For a long moment, she said nothing. I watched her fingers press lightly to the strap of her bag, noticed the way the sun caught the edges of her notebook sticking out, the way her hair swayed as she tilted her head. The sidewalk ended at a small bench, tucked under a tree. We sat, the space between us measured in breaths, in unspoken calculations. My heart raced, but the world around us continued, indifferent. I could have leaned closer. I could have whispered something I wasn't ready to hear myself say. Instead, I just watched her. And I wondered, if I reached out, would she let me? Would she pull away? She shifted, the wind playing with a strand of hair near her temple. And I realized the question wasn't about her. It was about me. How far I'd let myself go. How much I was willing to risk for the weight of feeling seen. You don't have to answer," I murmured, voice barely above the hum of the street. "But," I faltered. My hand hovered near hers, inches away. "Do you want this too?" She looked at me, and the pause stretched longer than either of us spoke. The bench held us, the light softened, and the question hung between us, half spoken, half unspoken. I didn't see her for a week. 7 mornings of the cafe stool across from me left empty, my coffee growing cold before I realized I wasn't stirring it fast enough. I told myself she was busy. Maybe life had pulled her elsewhere. But my chest tightened anyway, that quiet, stubborn ache I couldn't shake. Then one afternoon, I caught her in the bookstore down the street. She was flipping through a poetry section, fingers tracing the spines like she was remembering old friends. I waved. She froze, then nodded, brief, careful, and went back to the books. Not a glance. Not a word. I hovered nearby, unsure whether to approach, and noticed the bag at her side, smaller, lighter. She carried herself differently. Guarded. Like she'd folded herself in half to keep something tucked inside. I imagined reasons, work, family, someone waiting for her, something I didn't know. My mind spun scenes, none of them comforting. I thought about her hand brushing mine at the bench, and how fragile that moment had felt. Now, even that small gesture seemed like a memory that belonged to someone else. I kept walking past the cafe, avoiding the usual table, the usual stool, my phone buzzing with half-written messages I didn't dare send. I stared at the screen, watched the cursor blink. The words were all wrong anyway. Then, on Wednesday, I ran into her outside the library. She was laughing softly with someone, her son, I realized then, just at the corner of my vision. Mid-teens, tall enough to catch her eye easily, laughing the kind of laugh that belonged to her in a life I wasn't part of. I stepped back, pretending not to notice, pretending the twist in my chest was only wind, only air. I wanted to call her. I wanted to explain myself. I wanted to vanish. And yet I stood there, frozen, letting the moment pass like a train I couldn't board. That night I opened my phone. Her name sat there in the contacts, silent. The messages I drafted, coffee tomorrow, I'd been thinking, all unsent. I stared at them, thumb hovering over the send button, then set the phone down. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. Like the story had put a comma where a period should have been, and I didn't know when, or if, it would continue. The next morning, the cafe stool was empty again. I sat at a table across the room, notebook open, pen in hand, but I wrote nothing. The teacup steamed beside me. The barista offered a nod. I nodded back. Outside, the street carried on, indifferent. I glanced at the door every few seconds, like maybe she'd walk in. Maybe she'd wave, maybe not. The seat across from me remained empty. My thumb brushed the corner of my notebook. I traced the curve of the letters I hadn't written, words I hadn't spoken. And I waited. It was late afternoon again. I found her on the park bench near the fountain, the one she liked because the light hit the water just so. She was alone, notebook closed, bag at her feet. I hesitated at the edge of the path, wondering if stepping closer would ruin something delicate I wasn't sure I deserved. "Hi," I said finally, voice low. She looked up slowly. Not startled. Not expecting me. Just measured. "Hi," she replied. We sat in silence, the fountain's soft spray filling the space between our words. My hands fidgeted with the strap of my backpack. I wanted to say so much, about the week I'd spent imagining her, about the empty stool, about the messages I never sent, but I stopped. Instead, I watched her. You've been avoiding me," I said quietly, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. She shrugged, eyes on the water. "I needed space," she said softly. "Things are complicated. Life doesn't pause because feelings." She stopped herself. Took a deep breath. I nodded. My chest ached, but I didn't speak. Because saying the wrong thing could push her further away. But silence had its own weight, too. "Did you?" I began, then trailed off. Her hands twitched slightly as she adjusted the bag. I tried again. "Did you ever think about what us could be?" She looked at me then, full attention, and I saw the small fissures of hesitation, of fear, of curiosity. I do," she said. Bare, simple, without flourish. "But I'm scared of the cost. And I don't want to hurt anyone. Or lose myself." I nodded again. Every fiber of me wanted to reach across the bench, to close the space between us, but I held back. Let the words exist without punctuation. Let the pause carry its own meaning. She exhaled softly. "I like this. I like being with you. Even if it's just here. Even if it's messy. Even if it's not perfect." I felt a weight lift. Not entirely, but enough. I reached out slowly, almost imperceptibly, my hand brushing the back of hers. She didn't pull away. She let it rest there, for a moment, and that moment stretched long enough to mean everything. "Okay," I said finally. Voice low. Certain, quiet. She smiled faintly. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just a soft acknowledgement of shared space, shared presence, and the fragile, complicated thing that was ours now. We stayed like that, hands nearly touching, the fountain's spray turning into quiet rhythm. Either of us spoke again. Didn't need to. The connection was enough. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't all answers. But for now, it was real. Weeks passed. Not in leaps or cinematic montage, but in small, ordinary ways. I kept my mornings at the cafe, stool by the window, black coffee steaming in its familiar cup. She arrived sometimes, chamomile tea in hand, hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, eyes searching for the space where mine waited. We didn't make a scene. No grand gestures, no confessions shouted over the hum of the street. Just quiet mornings, shared glances, the rhythm of two lives brushing close. I watched her fold her napkin the way she always did, and I felt the subtle pulse of connection, the tiny beat that made all the missed messages and emptied benches fade into background noise. One Saturday, she joined me on the park bench near the fountain, the one we had discovered in a hesitant afternoon weeks ago. The light caught the water just right, as if it knew the moment deserved its own soft spotlight. She smiled faintly, a small curve that carried all the trust, all the history, and all the careful risk we'd both carried silently. We didn't speak much. We let our routines speak for us, shared sips of tea, the brush of a hand when passing the sugar, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, unaware I noticed. There were no promises, no forecasts, no plans for perfect tomorrows. Just the quiet acknowledgement that we were here, together, in a way that felt earned. I remembered the first week she'd walked in, how her glance had made me forget to breathe. I remembered the bench, the library, the week she'd gone quiet, and all the tiny unsent words that had weighed heavier than anything we'd ever said aloud. And now, those moments existed only as echoes, soft and distant, guiding us to this slow, grounded peace. Sometimes we paused at the cafe at exactly 8:47 a.m., the ritual of timing so precise it became ours. Sometimes I made the coffee black, she, chamomile with honey. Sometimes, when she laughed softly at a minor observation, the quiet in the room felt like a whole world. And when the day ended, we'd walk together to the park bench, or to the corner bookstore, or sometimes, just past the fountain, no words necessary. Just the steady, deliberate presence of each other, small, patient, quietly devastating in the way it pressed against your chest and lingered there without demanding anything. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the rooftops, she leaned slightly against my shoulder while I held my tea. The steam fogged the corner of her notebook as she scribbled something I didn't need to read. I felt the weight of her hand on mine, light, almost accidental, and I knew she understood the language of everything we hadn't said. I smiled faintly, and she looked up, eyes meeting mine with that subtle curve of lips that had become our quiet signal. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a story for the movies. It was ours. And in that small, ordinary moment, I realized that some love stories don't need fireworks. They just need presence. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?